They thought they were foreclosing on an old, broke veteran, just another forgotten name in a courtroom nobody cares about. But when the judge read his full name aloud, the room stopped breathing. Turns out the man sitting quietly in the back wasn't just any homeowner. He was a decorated 3-star general, erased from history for disobeying orders that would have gotten 2,800 Americans killed. What started as a routine eviction would unravel into a national scandal, exposing racism in the banking system, fraud in military pensions, and a cover-up buried by the Pentagon for over 30 years. And the man they tried to evict? He didn't just come to defend his house. He came with a flash drive that could burn down the entire system. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Case number 47,293, Fairview Bank versus Marcus Johnson. The court clerk called it like it meant nothing. One more case on a sleepy Wednesday. Judge Brennan barely looked up from his coffee. The bank's attorney, a man so smug he probably ironed his socks, adjusted his cufflinks, already rehearsing his victory nod. At the back of the courtroom, Marcus Johnson stood slowly. No lawyer, no suit, no folder of rebuttals. Just a calm walk to the table with nothing but his name and history written across his back like scars no one could see. He didn't say a word yet, but somehow he already had more presence than the bank's entire legal team combined. "Mr. Johnson," the judge began, already weary. "You're representing yourself?" Marcus nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. I can't afford counsel." The bank's lawyer cleared his throat, loud enough to interrupt pity. "This is a clear-cut case, Your Honor. My client seeks foreclosure due to 15 months of non-payment." He emphasized each syllable like Marcus was deaf instead of dignified. "There are no disputes on record. The loan contract was signed. Payments ceased. The property must be released." He smiled, like it was already done, like the house had already been raised and debt replaced by a Starbucks. The judge turned his attention to Marcus. "Do you have anything you'd like to say in your defense?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I served 34 years in the United States Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. After I retired, my wife Eleanor was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Experimental treatments. No insurance coverage. Every cent we had went into her care. I fell behind on the mortgage, yes, but not because I gambled it away or ran from responsibility." His voice didn't tremble. It echoed, not loud, but solid, like it had spent decades commanding silence. The bank's lawyer sighed, as if exhausted by humanity. "While we sympathize with Mr. Johnson's personal loss, the bank's legal rights remain unaffected." That's when the judge flipped the file and paused. His hand stopped mid-turn, his brow twitched, and he leaned forward. "General Marcus D. Johnson?" he said, eyes locked on the page. The name came out like a memory he wasn't prepared to confront. There was a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of silence that usually lives in funeral homes or war memorials. Marcus just nodded. "Yes, sir." Judge Brennan stood up abruptly, something practically unheard of during a routine hearing. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced in a trembling voice, leaving the courtroom before the clerk could make the formal announcement. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but they weren't just witnessing a foreclosure. They were about to stumble into a reckoning. The judge didn't return alone. When the doors reopened, flanked by a bailiff, in walked a man who didn't belong in civil court any more than a tank belongs on a golf course. His uniform was pristine, ceremonial, and covered with more metal than a trophy case. 4 rows of medals, ribbons, citations, all of it gleaming like a history book written in steel. The silver eagles on his collar told part of the story. The silence he commanded told the rest. General William Harrison didn't come to testify. He came to salute. And the courtroom, without instruction, rose. Not for the judge, not for the law, but for the ghost they had tried to bury in paperwork. Harrison didn't acknowledge the bank's lawyer or the murmuring crowd. He walked straight across the floor, spine like a ruler, eyes locked on Marcus. "Permission to address General Johnson directly, Your Honor," he said, voice sharp enough to cut marble. The judge nodded, still pale. Harrison snapped to attention in front of Marcus, clicked his heels, and said what no one expected in a courtroom designed to strip dignity. "Sir, it is an honor to be in your presence again." Marcus blinked, not out of pride, but out of memory. It had been years since anyone looked at him like he still wore a uniform. Behind them, the bank's lawyer shifted in his seat, whispering to his assistants like he was asking if anyone had checked the weather forecast for thunder. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, but no one was listening, because General Harrison wasn't done. "With the court's permission," he said, "I would like to enter documents pertaining to Operation Desert Shield, specifically the leadership of Colonel, now General, Marcus D. Johnson." The judge didn't object. He just nodded like a man finally waking up from a long, shameful nap. Harrison approached the bench and laid down a folder stamped confidential. Inside were maps, mission logs, after-action reports, documents that hadn't seen daylight in 3 decades. What they revealed was stunning. In 1991, Johnson had been ordered to deploy nearly 3,000 American troops into a region near the Iraqi border. Intelligence claimed it was safe. Johnson disagreed. He called it a trap. He saw terrain patterns the computers didn't, predicted enemy movement with nothing but instinct and experience. His superiors told him to follow orders. He didn't. Instead, he delayed the deployment by 18 hours, long enough to verify his hunch. Satellite imagery confirmed that the original position was crawling with enemy forces. An ambush that would have shredded American lives like paper targets. His disobedience saved them. And for that, he was punished. Not openly, not with trial or reprimand. No, that would have been too obvious, too messy. Instead, they buried him. No 5th star, no public honors, just quiet retirement, a downgraded pension, and a legacy left out of the textbooks. "Because you see," Harrison said, turning to the courtroom, "it wasn't just about being right. It was about who got to be right. A black general contradicting the Joint Chiefs? That didn't fit the narrative." The room was dead silent. No one moved. Even the judge had stopped fiddling with his gavel, his eyes glued to the folder like it was a confession signed by history itself. Marcus didn't say a word through any of it. He didn't need to. The truth didn't need defending when it had just walked in wearing stars on its shoulders. It was only then that the people in the courtroom began to see him, not as a debtor, not as a number, but as a man who'd carried an army and then been dropped by the country he served. They saw the stillness in his posture not as defeat, but discipline, the silence in his voice not as shame, but strength. This wasn't just about overdue payments, this was about overdue respect. And yet, what unraveled next didn't come from the Pentagon. It didn't come from generals or dusty folders. It came from the hallway, from a woman holding a tablet, a civilian, young, sharp, and uninvited. She didn't wear a uniform, but she carried something just as dangerous, documentation. And she was about to reveal that what happened to Marcus Johnson wasn't an isolated injustice. It was a pattern, a paper trail, a quietly engineered system targeting men like him, on purpose. And she hadn't come to watch. She'd come to finish what the generals had started. If this story of injustice against a forgotten hero is touching your heart, sign up now to find out what happens when the truth about General Johnson finally comes to light after decades of silence. She approached him quietly during the recess, like someone who had been watching the battlefield from the edge, but was finally ready to step into the line of fire. "General Johnson," she said, extending a hand, "I'm Dr. Amara Washington, Veterans Affairs." She looked young, too young to be carrying what she was about to drop, but her eyes weren't new. Her eyes were seasoned, sharp, like someone who had read too many files that didn't add up. Marcus nodded, curious but cautious. She opened her tablet, tapped a few times, and turned it toward him. "You've been receiving 60% less than you're owed in pension for over 10 years. His brow furrowed, not from disbelief, but from recognition. He'd always suspected something was off, but when the machine tells you you're wrong, and the machine controls the check, you learn to swallow doubt and keep marching. Mara didn't blink. "You're not the only one, sir." She slid through the next screens, names, numbers, cross-referenced ranks and race and payment tiers. "You're number 12 on my list," she said. "All high-ranking black officers, all with similar service records, all shorted by the exact same percentage." Marcus stared at the screen, quiet, not because it surprised him, but because it didn't. "You're saying this is a pattern?" She nodded. "Not an error, not a clerical hiccup. A directed recalculation that just so happens to miss white officers entirely." He sighed. "They didn't break promises," he muttered. "They bent numbers until men disappeared inside them." In that moment, the foreclosure wasn't just about the house anymore. That property had become a symbol, a footnote in a much bigger betrayal. Marcus wasn't just fighting to keep a roof. He was about to fight for every man who'd been handed a flag and a handshake and quietly robbed behind closed doors. And the timing of it all, how the pension was cut, how the house fell into default, how the bank pounced like it already had a buyer lined up, it started to feel less like coincidence and more like a trap. A long game played with calculators and contracts instead of chains. "This whole thing," Marcus said quietly, "it's not just about me." Amara nodded. "No, General. It's about a machine that eats its hero." Then came the smoking gun. Amara pressed play on a recording she hadn't meant to catch, but once she had it, she knew exactly what to do with it. It was the bank's lawyer, pacing outside the courtroom on his phone, thinking no one was listening. "I don't care who he was," he snapped. "We need that property for the resort project. We already have buyers lined up. He's just an old soldier who can't pay his bills. Who cares if he wore a uniform decades ago?" The voice oozed confidence, the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing the system's on your side, the kind that doesn't expect to be challenged, let alone recorded. Amara looked up at Marcus. "They think you're done, that you're tired, that you'll fold like the rest." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Something in his eyes shifted. Like an engine turning over, slow but certain. They hadn't just tried to take his house. They had picked a man who spent his whole life mastering the art of turning pressure into strategy. "They think this is about default," Marcus said, "but I didn't come to beg. I came to fight. And I didn't come alone." He tapped the flash drive in his coat pocket, a quiet smile forming. "If they want war, they should have checked the medals on my chest." Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that this old soldier wasn't standing in court to save his past. He was there to rewrite the future. When the court reconvened, Marcus didn't stand alone. This time, Amara Washington walked with him, calm, precise, and holding a legal binder thicker than the bank's entire case file. The judge glanced over his glasses, surprised. "Mr. Washington, are you representing Mr. Johnson now?" She nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been reviewing this case for 6 months. Quietly, today we speak." The bank's lawyer raised his eyebrows and smiled like he was watching a child try to lift a barbell. "A last-minute lawyer won't change the facts," he said with a chuckle, adjusting his cufflinks as if this was still a formality and not the beginning of his unraveling. Amara didn't even blink. "No, sir," she replied coolly, "but it might expose new ones." She opened the binder and walked to the bench like she owned it. "We are formally filing a counterclaim against Fairview Bank," she began, "under the Civil Relief Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and federal statutes regarding predatory lending." She turned and looked directly at the bank's lawyer. "Specifically, this bank's ongoing targeting of black military veterans with inflated interest rates and aggressive foreclosure practices." The smirk faded slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "Do you have evidence of this supposed pattern?" Amara didn't answer with words. She reached into her case and pulled out a flash drive, the same one Marcus had tapped earlier. "We have transaction data, statistical analysis, VA communications, and internal bank emails." The courtroom held its breath as the screen lit up with graphs, charts, and loan profiles. It wasn't just a theory, it was a trail. Over the past 8 years, Fairview Bank issued 2,467 loans to military veterans. White officers received interest rates averaging 3.4%. Black officers of equal or higher rank were charged rates between 5.9% and 7.2%. She paused, letting the numbers hit. And the higher the rank, the higher the rate. There's only one explanation for that, Your Honor, and it's not financial risk. It's strategic discrimination. The judge leaned forward, face tightening. The gallery began whispering. But Amara wasn't done. And then there's this, she added, clicking to a scanned email. It was dated June 5, 2018, from the VP of Lending. Risk profiles need to be reassessed for minority military clients. We know they are more likely to experience financial problems after retirement due to their socioeconomic background. The courtroom shifted again, unease growing. Then came the next message, this one from 2019. This property is ideal for the resort. Monitor closely and escalate if possible. These people usually don't have legal resources. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. The bank's lawyer sat frozen, mouth slightly open as if his tongue had forgotten which side it worked for. The color in his face drained slowly, one sentence at a time. The judge looked up, his tone heavier now. Ms. Washington, are you suggesting that the foreclosure proceedings against General Johnson were strategically triggered due to his profile and background? Amara nodded. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Your Honor. And we're not only requesting dismissal, we're requesting a formal investigation. Marcus remained quiet beside her, hands folded, eyes calm. The man who once commanded armies now stood like a loaded file cabinet, quiet, still, and ready to explode when opened. The bank's lawyer shuffled his papers, but none of them could help. He reached for words that weren't there, because suddenly he wasn't leading this case. He was answering for it. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, the courtroom doors opened again. 6 people entered, walking in formation, all in military dress uniform, all carrying sealed folders. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Marcus didn't look surprised, because when you've spent your whole life commanding the battlefield, you never come to court alone. Not when you know what's at stake, not when you know what's coming next. When the court came back to order, the 6 military officers hadn't moved from their row. They stood like bookends of authority, quiet but undeniable. But it was what followed that sent a chill through the courtroom. 2 men in suits walked in. No uniforms, no folders, just badges. Department of Justice. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. They took their seats like they'd been summoned by a bell no one else had heard. The judge shifted in his chair, suddenly aware of every bead of sweat under his collar. You know it's bad when the Department of Justice skips the popcorn and pulls up a chair. Amara stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to call our next witness, General Harrison, returning with additional documentation from the Department of Defense. The bank's lawyer objected half-heartedly, but the judge waved it off. Harrison walked to the front and placed a new file on the desk, stamped classified. What you're about to see, he said, was hidden for over 30 years. He tapped the folder once, then looked up. Because it didn't fit the story. The courtroom watched as maps were laid out, satellite images, troop placements, and one deployment plan marked with a giant red X. That was the position Johnson had refused to take in 1991. Enemy forces had been buried into the cliffs, artillery loaded, trap set. Had he followed orders, nearly 3,000 Americans would have been caught in a valley of steel. He saw what the satellites didn't, Harrison said. He'd delayed the operation by 18 hours and saved more lives in that one decision than most generals do in an entire war. The judge leaned forward, visibly rattled. Why wasn't this made public? Harrison looked directly at him, because admitting that a black colonel out-strategized the Joint Chiefs of Staff would have meant rewriting the record. Promotions were frozen, his 5th star buried, and eventually so was his pension. The weight of that truth didn't just fall. It thundered. No one said a word, because they all felt it now. The man in front of them hadn't been ignored. He'd been erased. Then came the next blow. Amara introduced a new witness, a former VA data technician named Lawson. Nervous, sweaty, but honest. "I was part of the 2018 pension recalibration task force," he said. "We were told to run a new algorithm to find overpayments and correct them." He swallowed hard, but what the system actually did was reduce payments to a very specific demographic. Amara pressed. "Which He looked down. "Black officers, especially those with multiple combat decorations, especially those from operations in the Middle East." She slid a document into the record, an internal VA memo. "Focus recalculations on high-rank minority recipients. Reassess contributions for disputed operations. In plain English, they used policy to punish dissent. And the dissent came from men who had been right all along. They used statistics like shackles," Amara said, her voice cold but steady. "Subtle, coded, legal, and utterly intentional." The courtroom no longer looked like a room of observers. It looked like a congregation waking up mid-sermon, realizing the altar was built on a lie. The DOJ reps didn't speak, but one of them pulled out a notepad. That alone made the bank's legal team flinch. Amara stepped forward one final time. "Your Honor," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of the moment. "This isn't a loan issue. This is a national stain, a bank that exploited its power, a government that helped cover the tracks, and a man who stood silent because no one would listen. Until now." She held up the final folder. "We don't just ask for the dismissal of this foreclosure. We ask for a federal investigation into Fairview Bank, the Veterans Administration, and the Department of Defense's pension handling over the last 10 years. She paused, letting the courtroom sit in it. "Because if Marcus Johnson can be erased, anyone can." The judge said nothing, but his hands, they were no longer steady. And the silence in that room, it wasn't confusion, it was the sound of justice turning, slowly but undeniably. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't cheer, it didn't clap, it just stood still, so quiet it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Judge Brennan stared down at the bench, fingers locked, eyes heavy. Then he looked directly at the bank's lead attorney. "You had 3 weeks," he said, voice low but sharp. "You brought arrogance. He brought America." The lawyer didn't move. The smirk from 3 weeks ago had long since evaporated. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, General Marcus D. Johnson. The foreclosure is dismissed with prejudice, and this court formally refers all supporting evidence to the Department of Justice for immediate investigation." The gavel came down like a hammer hitting history. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Fairview Bank is fined $87 million for proven discriminatory lending practices." And just like that, it wasn't Marcus who lost something that day. It was the system. What followed wasn't just fallout. It was fire. Federal indictments were unsealed within a week. Fairview's vice president of lending was led out of his office in handcuffs. Their regional director tried to resign. The resignation was denied and replaced with a subpoena. The pension recalculation algorithm shut down overnight. Hundreds of files reopened. Within months, over 700 black officers received corrected payments, retroactive to their retirement dates. What started as one foreclosure hearing ended up unraveling a multi-agency scheme that had quietly siphoned dignity and dollars from the very people who had worn the uniform. Marcus hadn't just defended his house, he had turned it into a spotlight. And one man's foreclosure lit up a corridor in Washington that had been kept dark for decades. Weeks later, Judge Brennan showed up unannounced at the dedication ceremony for the Eleanor Johnson Foundation, Marcus's new initiative offering legal aid to veterans facing housing discrimination. He waited until the cameras were off, until the microphones were gone. Then he walked up to Marcus and extended a hand. "My son," he said, voice quiet, "was a young lieutenant stationed in the Gulf, one of the 2,800 men you kept out of that valley. I've known that for a long time. I just never had the chance to say thank you." Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, shook the judge's hand, and looked him in the eye. "We all served," he finally said. "Some of us just had to keep serving after the medals stopped. And then, slowly, life settled. The house was his again. Clean title, no debt, but more than that, more than the bricks and keys, was what came in the mailbox. Letters, emails, messages from veterans across the country who had faced the same silent injustice, who now saw in Marcus a roadmap, a mirror, a reason to keep fighting. Young officers came to sit with him on the porch, asking for advice, asking how to push through without losing themselves. And Marcus gave them what he could, stories, guidance, and the space to believe that being invisible was not the same as being erased. He never called it a win. Winning suggested something temporary, something that could be undone. What Marcus did was deeper. He planted something. Not revenge, not glory, just roots. Something stable. Something no bank could threaten again. And as he sat on the same porch where Eleanor once grew her morning glories, watching the sun drop behind the trees, he said it best to Amara, who now led the Foundation's legal team with quiet fire. They tried to evict a man. What they did was give him a microphone, and 700,000 people heard him loud and clear. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.